Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national broadcaster about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, India's major strategic partnerships with countries around the world, and how India is making the world a better place. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking up a grand theme of India's global rise in multiple dimensions across culture, economy, military and security and diplomacy. We see that India's footprint and voice has grown on the global stage in the Narendra Modi era. So, we are going to be talking about these big transformative leap forward that India has taken, what are the reasons for it, and where is it heading as it continues its ascent. And to discuss this, let me introduce you to a very esteemed guest joining me today in the studio with me, Dr. Ram Madhav. Dr. Ram Madhav is president of important nationalist India Foundation. He is also a member of the national executive of the largest socio-cultural organization of India, the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. Ram Madhav ji, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you.
Ram Madhav ji, India's rise, for a long time people have been wanting to see this, and now it feels like as if it is happening live while we are talking. Every day since 2014, since Prime Minister Modi took over, there has been this upward trajectory in all dimensions. And your thoughts on why this is happening at this juncture in world history, why India is rising, especially in these dimensions I talked about. To start with the culturally, because our identity as a nation had been under some kind of cloud and confusion. You have been writing and talking about this for a long time, that finally we have found our true identity as a civilizational power. So, how do you see India's rise as a civilizational power over the last decade?
Thank you, Sreeram ji. What we witness today is the rise of authentic India. What happened after independence was that we were rising, but not as our own selves. We were rising as an imitating power. We borrowed so many things from all over the world. Of course, good things should always be accepted. But what a major change that we experience today as Indians is that today we are our own selves. We are manifesting before the international community as authentic Indians. The Indian authenticity is what the world is experiencing today in terms of its culture, in terms of its expression in all the different walks of life, including diplomacy, I would say. Today we have come to our own way of diplomacy, which we describe, our Prime Minister describes as strategic autonomy. We are no longer just imitating the others. You talked about cultural front. India's cultural and civilizational identity should have played a proud role, important role immediately after the independence. But unfortunately, since I used the word, we were imitating. Yeah. We were imitating certain external foreign ideas. So we thought that probably we should subdue our own cultural civilizational identity for the time being, and we should simply follow in the footsteps of other powers. But today, the proud India has woken up. It's standing with pride in front of the world community with the glory of its culture and civilization. That's what is the great change that the world is not only seeing but appreciating and really welcoming it.
Yes. And Ram Madhav ji, you have written, you are columnist for the Indian Express, a very respected national newspaper. You have written that there are some concepts that India brings to the fore. And for example, you have talked about dharmocracy, meaning a democracy that is imbued with the ancient Indian ethos and wisdom and traditional knowledge and philosophy. And these kinds of things you have said really stand us apart, and also show how these symbols, cultural symbols, we are no longer unafraid of exhibiting them. And Prime Minister Modi has shown equal amount of respect to all our major religious traditions, both within India and in his overseas travels. And we have seen that across the world, that he goes and respects the local cultures there which have a link to India also. So that idea of the civilizational state or the power seems to have arisen now, and it is a conscious thing that the leadership is seems to be pushing that to the fore now, which you've just mentioned, the core identity. And I think that's what the world expects from India, right? You have been involved in so many diplomatic events, and you've engaged with world leaders in various capacities, and you always find that they expect India to represent that civilization. And if it was confused, probably that's not something they would also appreciate, right? So today it seems like the higher respect, the grand receptions the PM gets wherever he goes, all of it is linked to this aspect that we are now being this Bharat, or more authentic.
Yes, as you said, India is the world's largest democracy. But you also will appreciate the fact, or the world appreciates the fact, that it's not just about the size. It's the most successful democracy in the last 7 decades. We became a democratic polity in 1950 through our constitution, and many other countries became democracies in the last 50 to 100 years. But look at the journey of India. It has presented a most successful model of democracy. But what is the reason behind it? I would say that the reason is India's democracy draws, of course the idea came from the West. Democracy as an idea is a Western idea, no doubt. But India has drawn inspiration for its democratic functioning from its own tradition, from its own civilizational past, where for us democracy meant not just the rule of the majority. Gandhiji, the great leader of India's independence movement, used to always say that for India, democracy meant Ram Rajya, where the words of the last man also carried great significance. So our democracy is and will continue to be a democracy that represents the voices of the ordinary people. That's the reason why in India, at the drop of the hat, governments change.
Yeah.
We have a very functional democracy where people are the real masters. This is the spirit of India. This is the essence of India. So right from there to everywhere, we try to bring in India's civilizational and cultural value system into the day-to-day functioning of our country. For example, in India, we do not completely shun culture and civilization from our statecraft. Maybe a France would do it. Maybe another European country may do it.
In the name of secularism.
In the name of secularism.
Yeah.
In any case, secularism is not one for all countries. Secularism in France means complete rejection of culture and religion. Whereas in America, it's a secular country. But the presidents always take oath by placing their hands on Bible. That is a model. But in India, we respect the role of culture, civilization. That's why when a Rafael lands in India, it's welcomed by breaking a coconut,
with
by
a Sanskrit
offering an
shloka
arti to it. So here culture and civilizational value system is integral to our functioning. That's why this democracy can as well be described as dharmocracy. It has a value system behind it that made this democracy successful and very functional in India, whereas big countries like, even countries, world's oldest democracies like UK and USA are today struggling with many aspects of their democracy.
Absolutely. And viewers, Ramadhavji is talking about why India is unique and why that has actually raised its stature in the Committee of Nations. There's another reason apart from the cultural renaissance for which India is now being looked at as a land of opportunity, and this is economic. And obviously, in the current international order, as the fastest growing major economy, there's a lot of hope and expectation around India as a place where the whole world can converge and come and actually make money and get return on investment. And in the process, India also develops and grows to become the world's 3rd largest economy. On this, I have a very interesting set of comments by John Chambers, who is a widely respected American tech CEO. He runs a company called JC2 Ventures. He was formerly the CEO of Cisco. John Chambers, in the presence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, talking about the India dream of high economic growth and why he is placing all his bets on India. Let's listen to him and return to the discussion.
Many in America have a very positive view of India and the Prime Minister, but they really don't understand how far this country's come in the last decade. The country has moved from a very slow follower, where the government was very bureaucratic and very, very slow moving and rigid and not a dreamer, to the most innovative country in the world. It shows up in the economic results, where the country has moved from number 10 in the world to number 5, and as the Prime Minister said, in the next couple of years, number 3. However, I'm usually pretty good at getting market transitions and being accurate on connecting the dots for the future. India will become the number 1 economy in the world. And it will do so under the plans and programs the Prime Minister is putting in place. When you look at really leadership is made up of 3 component parts, in my opinion. It's your currency. It's first about your track record. And the track record of the Prime Minister in India over the last decade is an envy of the entire world, an example and a model for us to follow. Secondly, it's the ability to form relationships. This leader can form relationships with leaders around the world, with Democrats and Republicans. A little bit of Southern humor there. But also, he instills trust. And often when people come together and say, here's what we can do together in the future, it is all about trust. Do you trust me? Do you trust the other side that both of us will deliver? When people ask me that question, I have one simple answer. I would trust this leader with my life.
So viewers, John Chambers saying, I will trust Prime Minister Narendra Modi with his life, and the whole, he is talking not just as an individual, but on behalf of Western capital. You know, big investors have been flocking to India. The record FDI inflows that have been coming in, now more than $85 billion a year, shows that there is a vote of confidence in favor of India. And Prime Minister, in his economic diplomacy, has also shown that there's so many transformative things happening at home that India has automatically become a lot more attractive. Coming back to Ramadhavji, Ramadhavji, the economic success is, goes without saying that this has been a big plus point, why the world is seeing India with so much expectation today. And I think there's something to be said about the last 9 years where we have been able to sell the India story a lot better than it was before. And of course, the grassroots structural transformations that have been happening, especially with infrastructure. Everybody, anywhere in the world, and you meet so many world leaders yourself, everyone's talking about the infrastructural, complete metamorphosis that's happening in India. So your thoughts on this aspect of India's rise? And obviously, I think if you take a longer view, India was a major world economic power, but we lost it through colonial invasions and exploitation. But now finally, free India, sovereign India, and one which is shedding the old colonial vestiges, seems to be really making its mark on the global economy again.
John Chambers is a good friend of India. Whatever he said is generally the sentiment that you find across the world today. The reason is that India is today rising not because of the strength of a handful of big companies. What Prime Minister Modi has done in the last 9 years has been to unleash the grassroots potential of India. India's rise, if you compare it with the rise of some of the other countries in the past, may look like a little slow when you compare it with the other countries in the past. But it is the most sustainable rise that India is registering. We are growing not with the strength of any handful of people, but on the strength of grassroots Indian grassroots power. That is the greatest strength, that is going to be the greatest strength of India's economy. Through our inclusive economic practices, like whether it is the issue of digitization. Today, the reach of India's digitization is almost 100%. People talk about electricity reaching all the villages in India. Together with electricity, even internet has reached almost 80-85% of India today. So the digital inclusion, that empowerment of the grassroots Indians has today given enormous strength to Indian economy, which is manifesting in this stable and steady growth. Today, it took a lot of time for us to reach the 10th position. To reach $1.9 trillion economy, it took us almost 60 years. But in just 10 years' time, we doubled the size of our economy. Today, we stand at $3.4 trillion economy, and we are the number 5th, aspiring to be number 3rd, and maybe, as John Chambers said, we will become number 1 one day.
Yes.
But the point is, how is it happening? Are we creating oligarchs in this country? No, it is the unleashing of the potential at the grassroots through Startup India campaigns, to innovative economic campaigns in this country, through digital inclusivity, many such programs. India is creating a large, strong economy, but remember, we are creating an economy which is going to be very sustainable. This growth will be sustained over decades now.
Yes.
I can compare it with the kind of growth that countries like Singapore registered for 20 years, 25 years, a sustained growth of 7%, 8%, 10%. That kind of growth India is registering. Remember, the 6%, 6.5% growth is at this juncture a very significant growth, but it is going to continue like this. It will go up, it will not go down in future, because it is based on very sound fundamentals right at the grassroots of our economy.
Absolutely. So it's more broad-based and even-handed, and it's a bottom-up and middle-out, as they call it, not just a top-down kind of growth, which can be short-term and which can also lead to more inequalities and tensions. But viewers, it's not only the economic rise, but also an assertive India in strategic culture as well, that we have seen in the last decade. The way India stood up to its adversaries, the statecraft that has always existed in the India's DNA has emerged, and we are a lot more confident in dealing with them. Ram Madhav ji, you have mentioned you've written in your Indian Express columns and also in your books about the way we have been handling our main adversary, which is China, and a lot of people around the world are interested in knowing how will India stand up to China, and that is probably one of the parameters on which our rise is going to be judged. And you've talked about the bolder posturing we have done on the ground in terms of military, and also the more proactive diplomacy, which has taken us, which has given more confidence to the rest of the world that India is really emerging as a democratic superpower and a counterweight to China. So your thoughts on the military and the strategic dimensions of our rise, and what is it about our approach that is unique in the way countries have risen using military and strategic powers? We are not interested in wars, obviously, but deterrence and capabilities and net security provider to smaller countries. These are some of the things that stand out, in my view. Your thoughts on this, Ram Madhav?
So India's strategically significant role that India is playing today need not be limited to India's border conflicts, like conflict with China. That is one aspect of it. It's a smaller aspect when it comes to the larger geostrategic role that India is playing or intending to play in the world. As far as India and China border conflict is concerned, it has been an ongoing conflict for us. We have inherited it when the government came in 2014. We inherited a very difficult border situation. A very qualitative change that Prime Minister Modi introduced to the relationship was that while in the past, whenever we faced a challenge from China, we used to resort to proactive diplomacy. We used to send our diplomats to resolve the standoffs, resolve the crisis. But what Prime Minister Modi did was, together with proactive diplomacy, he also displayed a strong ground positioning. Today, we stand very firm on the ground also. So, proactive diplomacy together with strong ground posturing is what is yielding better results for India today. It's a new thing for even China. That's the reason why out of 8 standoffs in just 2 years' time, we could find a resolution in 5 places. So, that is a significant...
We would be
yes.
So firm and so resolute. Yeah.
Yes. Today, if they have a 50,000 standing army on their side of the border, we have 50,000 on our side also. So this tactical shift that has happened has yielded good results for us. But our strategic place in the world is much more beyond this immediate neighborhood conflict with China or Pakistan. India today is a pivot to a large section of the world, which we generally call as global south, or earlier we used to call it as the developing world.
Yes.
India today displayed a kind of an autonomous position in in the global strategic ecosystem.
Absolutely.
When big countries are fighting, earlier smaller countries used to be forced into taking sides. Today we said that we will only take the side of peace. So in that you use the word net security provider.
Yeah.
India would like to play the role of net peace provider. So the role that India would probably carve out for itself would be to lead the global south
Yes.
for providing peace in the world.
Absolutely.
So we took that strategic autonomous position for providing peace, not necessarily taking sides in providing security alone.
Provision of peace, that's the ultimate public good that the world needs, and India is doing it. Viewers, on the question of global south, a very interesting small video clip of James Marape, the Prime Minister of the tiny Pacific island nation of Papua New Guinea, talking about India as a leader of the global south and what these small island nations expect from a leader like India. Let's hear him and continue the discussion.
We need a big third voice to be active for the small island nations at G20, at G7. We appreciate your presence with us at FIBIC. You are the voice that can offer our issues at the highest as advanced economies discuss on matters relating to economy, commerce, trade, and geopolitics. We suffer as a result of big nations at play in terms of geopolitics and the power struggles out there. We ask you, using this moment where I am co-chairing, and I speak for my small brother and sister nations of the Pacific, whilst our land may be small and number may be small, our area and space in Pacific is big. The world uses it for trade, commerce, and movement. We are victims of global power play. We want you to be an advocate for us as you sit in those meetings. And I put to you, as the leader of the third realm, the third group, the third block of nations that must emerge. Those are the emerging nations, and we will rally behind your leadership at Global Forum.
So viewers, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea talking about the high hopes and aspirations that small developing countries have about India, and this very much echoes what Ramadhaji was talking earlier about India positioning itself as an independent power center. And the Papua New Guinea leader was talking about a third force in the world, meaning obviously there's China and the US, but then India is emerging as a third force, and with the authentic leadership of the global south. Ramadhavji, there are many countries that pretend to be part of the global south. I mean, the G77 grouping, China has often associated itself with G77 and has tried to usurp the stature of being the leader of global south. But the point is, like we have been discussing, especially in last 9 years, there's so many transformative concrete things we have been doing for the global south on the ground, in Africa, in Latin America, in poorer parts of Asia, in our neighborhood, in West Asia, that people are seeing India as actually in a position to really support their rise and their growth. And I think it echoes the vision of Prime Minister's Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. It is really on a global scale, isn't it? And you see that when you also interact with world leaders, how grateful they are to India. And this is not something we are bragging about. This is the reality. So your thoughts on our global south approach, our strategy, and the dividends that it is yielding?
So firstly, we are living in a heteropolar world. People talk about multipolarity. Multipolarity essentially means multiple states emerging as poles. But when I say heteropolarity, it's about states and also non-state actors. Today, for example, big tech, multinational big tech corporations, whether it is a Facebook or it is a semiconductor company, chip manufacturers like TSMC, they are also big powers. They have huge influence. We have terrorist groups who have influence. We have global NGOs which have influence. We are living in a very heteropolar world order today. In a heteropolar world order, smaller countries, especially countries in global south, which are largely developing countries, they face enormous pressure from all sides. Big powers put their pressure. Today, a new type of Cold War is unfolding between the Western powers and China. So this kind of Cold War situation, maybe smaller countries don't want it. They don't want to take sides. For them, they needed another country which can give them enough confidence to stand up. That role today, India is able to play. So that is why I said we will be playing the role of net peace provider, which the global south wants for its future, for its development. Because remember, global south's challenges are different. Yeah. Global south challenges are challenges like environment, climate change, challenges like supply chain disruptions, challenges like economy, food security. Yes. Now, the big conflict is not about them. The big conflict is about their economies, their trade, their control over territories. So today, smaller countries look up to another alternative which they can probably follow. Absolutely. That role India is willing to play. That's why you showed the clip of Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister. Many other countries in our own neighborhood and also in the vast global south want India to take lead. Just I will tell you one thing before we close. On Ukraine conflict, when India took a principled stand that we won't be a party to either side. We do not want war, we are opposed to war, but we will not join in any kind of coalition there. Yeah. When we took that stand, India's strategic autonomous position has given confidence to not less than 50 countries in the world. Absolutely. When we took that position, Indonesia took that position, Saudi Arabia took that position. Dozens of countries took that position, which do not want to be a party to any new Cold War. So that is the role India should play. India is continuing to play now.
So viewers, Madhav ji is basically saying that India is a moral power, and of course we have material attributes like economy and military and diplomacy and all these things, but ultimately the kind of position we are taking is based on the notion of dharma, and so dharmocracy and dharma based statecraft is what we are seeing, and that is the reason why India's stature seems to continue to climb to a higher level. The whole world sees us as Prime Minister says, a Vishwa Guru, or one that is teaching its precepts and also winning over more and more friends to its side. So this is the epic journey of India's rise, and I want to thank Madhav ji for sharing his deep intellectual insights as always. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And viewers, do think about all the dimensions of India's rise. What makes a country at a particular juncture in history to go to the top, and why is India on the trajectory? Please think deeper, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.